You're listening to the My Simplified Life podcast, and this is episode number 290. Welcome to the My Simplified Life podcast, a place where you will learn that your past and even your present don't define your future. Regardless of what stage of life you're in, I want you to feel inspired and encouraged to pursue your dreams, simplify your life, and start taking action. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, author of How to Get On Podcasts, the podcast matchmaker, and CEO and founder of the MLG Collective. I'm excited to share the stories and life lessons of changemakers and authors with you while taking you on my own journey. This is My Simplified Life. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Michelle Glogovac, and today I am fangirling. I am so excited. I have the incredible Rhonda Foxx with me. She's the founder of the Persist network, and she's also the former Women for Harris staffer. She's run for Congress. She's like an all-around badass, the person to be friends with. She's doing incredible things, and I am so stoked to get to talk to her and to now call her my friend. We are connected for life, as she says, and I can't wait for you to just listen to how she shares that we need to be involved. We need to build community. We have a lot of work to do, but we can do it together. And there are so many different creative ways that we can do it. So get ready to be inspired. And who knows, after this episode, you might want to run for office. Hello, Rhonda.
Hello. How are you,
Oh,
Michelle?
I am so good now. I am
Yes.
so excited for this. You have no idea, my friend.
I'm excited to be
Yeah.
here.
To reach
Yes.
out to you to get yes, I will be on within 24 hours. I was like,
Of
oh,
course.
pinch me, my friend.
Of
No,
course.
you're a big deal, and I'm going to fangirl all over you.
The same goes. I cannot explain the importance of the work that you're doing, especially when we look across the mainstream media, you know, environment. We are losing voices of reason. We are losing women's voices. So thank you and your audience
Oh,
for tuning in, but plus giving us this platform.
thank you. Can you introduce
Yeah.
yourself to everyone, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Rhonda Foxx, and I am the founder of a group called Persist. Prior to that, I was the National Women's Engagement Director for President Biden, but obviously, eventually becoming that for Vice President Harris. Together, along with many of you, Michelle included, we built one of the largest campaign coalitions in history. And after the election, we decided to keep that coalition intact and to persist. But before that, I worked for 6 different women in federal politics and policy, starting with Senator Gillibrand as an intern and making my way up to being the youngest woman of color chief of staff for Congresswoman Alma Adams, she's from my home state, and then eventually running for Congress in 2020 in my state, which, Michelle, we have to talk about how important it is for women to run. And this is the moment for all women
Yes.
listening to run for something. But just, have just had a whole career and just a passion for women's representation in leadership. And I look forward to continuing to do that with all of you as persisters.
I love it. I am so excited about the
Yeah.
Persist Network. I love what you're doing.
Yeah.
I couldn't be more thrilled that you've
Yeah.
put all of these people together, these women, because we need to be speaking up. We need to come
Mm-hmm.
together because there's a lot at risk. And
We should do.
I'm perplexed that so many still don't understand what is still at stake every day.
Yeah. And I always say this, Michelle, for 2 years, actually, since Donald Trump took office in 2016, and then really when he ran again here in 2024, Democrats have beat the drum that this is an existential threat, that Project 2025 would become a reality. We've got to start acting like we are in the crisis moment that we are and start doing things a lot differently. And keeping Persist, which is the Women's Coalition, intact is step one to doing that, not collapsing these relationships, not collapsing our opportunities to be together, to strategize, but also to message to our corners of the world. I think a lot of times we think, I've got to be some nationally known leader to make a difference. People listen to who they know. You have way more ability to influence your friends, your family, your neighbors, your colleagues than any national leader. So we are all our leaders in this moment. and we are going to be the ones that make it clear we are in an existential threat. So that I just put out there. We are in perplexing times, and all of us have the ability to navigate our communities through it.
And you're so right. I have seen friends go, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to start posting. I'm going to start talking about it more because I'm sitting here preaching. Come on, you guys, everybody, do
Everyone,
something, say
yeah,
something.
yeah. And I think we just have built systems where people have lost sight of the fact that power still is, as corny as it sounds, it is still with people. Like you still have the power to influence any and everything that you want. And even I go to Persist, I think one of my main messages would be like literally last week we had an opportunity to go to New York, do an event with Diane von Furstenberg and Gloria Steinem. And I'm just sitting there the whole time. Who are we to be in such an iconic space with such icons talking about the next levels and the next phases of the women's movement? But we were just a group of women that said we want to stay together, and we donated our time, our energy, and here we are. And so I would say to any woman listening, it's just one thing, and it can make such a transformative difference. Just step out there, make your voice heard, however you want to do that, and who knows what happens. Like, but that, I think that is the essence of Persist, is just women that said, shoot, we want to do something.
And so, what is Persist going to do for people who are listening? How can they get involved, and what exactly does Persist entail? Because it's a
Yes.
national movement. It's huge.
Well, we hope, but I think, the core of it is we want to keep women connected, and we don't want to just do it online. Obviously, across our network of persisters, we reach over 60 million women through our individual platforms, but we want to do it in person. Because obviously, what we know is right now there are social media platforms plus algorithms that are shadow banning a lot of democratic and progressive content. We know that mainstream media has gotten rid of a lot of women's voices, Joyanne Reed, Katie Fang, who is a member of Persist. So what we're trying to do is beat that. A huge part, we look at the algorithm, which is very, male dominated. It is very bigoted in many respects in different corners of the internet. We're looking for ways to beat that. So Persist believes in organizing in person as much as we do online. And ultimately, the strength of the Women's Coalition is about bridging our divides. So we spend a lot of time bringing women together who may not see eye to eye policy wise, but they all want to be politically engaged. They may not come from the same geographies, from the same walks of lives, the same socioeconomic status, but we bring them together to have conversations about politics in a civilized manner. Because I also think part of what has sown division across the Women's Coalition is saying you can't talk politics. You shouldn't talk politics at work, or you shouldn't talk politics with this person. Yes, you should. You absolutely should. And so that's what our network is. It's socially inclined women who want to be politically engaged, and we bring them together. And I hope through that we'll strengthen our coalition, bridge some divides, and really beat that algorithm, which is the new systemic inequity that I think is facing the Women's Coalition.
I think now we're seeing more people understanding that politics is literally a role. It plays a role in everything we
Everything.
do every single day. And so when someone
Everything.
says, "Well, don't talk politics," well, it's everything's
It's your
political. It's like
life.
books are political. Like everything, my business is political. Do you pay your taxes? Then it's political.
Political. Everything is
Everything is
political.
political.
But by telling us you can't talk politics, it kind of give said forces more control, right? And it sows more
Mhm.
division. And so I think right now we have to kind of break that down and make it cool, quite honestly, to talk about politics. And so that's kind of what we're trying to do. And I will say this, when we talk about like the implications of politics in our everyday lives, especially for women, um, I ran for Congress in 2020, and I ran in Greensboro, North Carolina. And one of the biggest forces is just the hyper politicalization of the educational system. And it's something that for a long time we've taken our eyes off what state governments, what local governments are doing with education. And what I saw in Greensboro when I ran was a systemic rollback of civics funding. Why are we cutting civics for children? Why don't children know how to vote? And we even saw this in 2024 with a lot of our youth vote saying, oh, I'm going to just show up to the polls and vote. That's not how that works, right? But when you cut civics education, when there's that hyper politicalization of education, then you end up in this position. And, seeing certain educational leaders in Greensboro paying out of their own pocket to bus their students who are 18 and above to go vote, teaching them how to vote, but also facing severe repercussions, in their educational systems for doing that. It was an eye opener. And so politics, to your point, Michelle, it hits you in every nook and cranny. It is part of your life, regardless of if you want it to be or not. No one can be politically agnostic. So you might as well be part of the conversation and part of the forces that are shaping the politics that impact your everyday life. There's no reason children don't have civics education. That's absurd.
Mhm.
It's
Yes,
absurd.
and as a mom, it's my job, I feel, to engage my kids, from my stepkids who
Yeah.
are 26 and 23 to my little ones who are 10 and almost 9. You all know how I voted. I explained to you why I voted this way. We had conversations with the older ones of, you have to vote. And if you don't vote, I don't want to hear a word from
Hmm.
you for the next 4 years. Do not complain to me.
About anything
This
that's
is
happening.
important. Yeah.
Do not. And so I also say one of those ways, if you're looking like, how do I do something in this moment? All change is not immediate. Some of it is long game, right? And I think Republicans have a great way of understanding that. This is going to be a long game strategy, not an immediate strategy. That's how they got the rollback of education in certain communities. It was a long game strategy to take back state houses through ALAC. I think we all remember ALAC. But one of the long way strategies that you can truly make a difference, taking your child with you to vote, taking your child with you if you're going to a political conversation, modeling that behavior of how to be a civically engaged individual. My parents, it was the highlight. We're going to get our sticker, and now I can't imagine, not casting a ballot. So that kind of stuff, we think like, what kind of difference would this make? A huge difference, like a
Hmm.
huge difference. Seeing a parent model certain behavior, especially when it comes to civic engagement. It's long strategy, but it's an important strategy. And it's a first way to start stuff.
I totally agree, and it's funny because growing up, I didn't grow up like this. This was not my mom was she came from Switzerland, so
Uh,
she became
oh,
a
neutral
citizen,
too.
but it wasn't, yes, neutral. But it wasn't like, politics. And as I've gotten involved and older, she's like, "What, are you running for something soon?"
Yeah,
And wait, what do you mean you took your kids canvassing? Why would you do that to them? Like, because now they know the
you
mayor
had to.
and now they
Mm-hmm.
know how
Mm-hmm.
politics and elections
Mm-hmm.
work, and they will remember this forever, and hopefully they continue to stay involved,
In the
because if we don't
process.
stay involved, then look at what can happen.
And it's funny, one of the largest canvassing weekends that the Women's Coalition did, it was the founders of Moms Rising, Girls Who Code, and a couple of other organizations, and they bought moms with their children, and they were so adamant to the campaign, we are bringing our children on this canvassing weekend. And they had hundreds of women come into Pennsylvania canvassing with their children. Those children won't forget that, like that's ingrained and embedded in them. And it's really that grassroots organizing, it is that grassroots activism which is going to be the difference. I think in just getting our democracy back on track, like literally getting people to once again be civically engaged. Um, we've got to do that. But it was the highlight. It was one of my funnest campaign events. I'm like, look at these children going to knock on doors. And funnily, in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which is not easy terrain for anyone because it's such a divided area. But they're like, no, we're taking them straight into Bucks. I'm like, oh my
Hmm.
goodness, they won't forget it.
And you can't be mean when you open a door and there are children on your
You would
doorstep
be
either.
you
So
gotta tone it
I'd be
down.
surprised. Well,
You
yeah,
gotta tone it
you
down. You gotta
should.
tone it down. Tone it down. There's a youth. Tone it down. But it was a phenomenal thing to see, just the power of moms organizing and getting their kids active.
Let's talk about you running for Congress too, because you mentioned that we want women to run. What was that like? What inspired you to do that? How did you go about it? Because I'm
Yeah.
looking at our congressman. I told my husband this. I go, I would love to do what he does, but man, oh man, he is on the road all the time and it's crazy his
It's
schedule. I said,
crazy.
I wouldn't be at soccer practice. I wouldn't be doing all these
It's
things.
really tough. It's really tough for women, and there are some steadfast champions out there trying to make it easier for women to run. One such as income, like, because you don't get income. Like, I blew through. my bank account, like running for Congress. And so I think there's a lot of reforms that we can do to make it easier for women in particular to run. But I ran in 2020, not because it was something I really wanted to do, but I was asked to do it. And they do say statistically, women have to be asked upwards of 7 or 8 times to run before they run. Whereas a man, he'll Google it and say, "Oh, think I should run today." Like, so, but I was asked to run. I literally, Michelle, had been the chief of staff to my boss for 5 years, and I decided it was time to go. It's a tough environment. The Hill is always tough, ever changing, and plus, it's time to pass the baton, right? Because a lot of folks stay in jobs a long time. I think we're seeing that as members of Congress, but you want someone else, fresh ideas, fresh direction. So I said, look, I'm going to leave. And I just literally put it on my LinkedIn that I was going to go back to North Carolina and figure out next steps. I get a call while I'm literally at a farewell happy hour from the DCCC, which is the campaign committee for House Democrats. And they're like, we need you to run. I'm like, OMG, is that a new happy hour location? Where shall I meet you? To wish me farewell. And they're like, no, we need you to run for office. And so it set the thing into motion. And I will say, because I do think that this is a conversation that we have to have about internalized misogyny, the role that women not supporting women plays in us not having equity across the spectrum in terms of women's representation. But originally, my boss is all gung ho. We go to breakfast. She's like, I'm excited. I'm like, are you sure? Because I don't have to do this. She's gung ho. Something happens in a week's time, and she flips the script on that. But we had already started working with the DCCC, building a campaign team. So we're going to go for it, right? And we end up, getting ready to launch in North Carolina. I was supposed to be in a hyper competitive general election, no primary, because it was a complicated seat that shifted right, but it was with Ted Budd, who's now a senator in North Carolina. As we are literally filing, North Carolina loves to redistrict. So it goes from what should have been with all Democratic, force and weight to kind of transform this Republican district. It goes to a 2-month campaign that is going to be a hyper competitive primary. And so 4 other Democrats throw their hats into the ring. My boss decides I'm not going to participate in this. And so I'm kind of out there as a lone island. We go from 0% name rec to finishing second in a 5-way primary, the only candidate that had never run before, and we were just knocked off by a self-funder. And so after that grueling campaign, going from bottom to number 2, had we had a longer runway, I firmly do think that result would have been different. But I was angry, as you can imagine. And I will never forget it when Sherry Bustos, who at the time was the chair of the DCCC, so I was recruited under that apparatus, actually called after the race and just said, don't give up. It worked this way because we don't play in primaries. For Emily's List, I'm the poster child of Emily's List. From the time I was an intern on up, I've worked for Emily's List candidates, was trained by Emily's List. They decided to sit out of the race into them. That was a thing because the woman that did beat me, she had been endorsed by Emily's List. So they're like, we are just going to be neutral, that, we're not going to play in this. But when you go through that, there's so much hurt because you've built your career around this. You gave it your all. It wasn't your idea to run. I ran because at the time, for women under 40, Black women under 40, there was only one in Congress, despite the fact we are the highest voting bloc for Democrats. That was Lauren Underwood at the time. And so I ran, to try to change that. And so I was a little upset. I was hurt. And then the pandemic is setting in, right? So you're sitting in this apartment and you're like, what am I going to do with my life? I'm so angry. And you have a lot of time to overthink all the things. And so I took 3 years off. I went into the corporate space. So that's how I got to Intel Corporation. I took 3 years off. And I say all of that to say, for everyone out there, Michelle, this is like a non sequitur, but yet a sequitur. Everyone looking at Kamala Harris, what are you doing right now? Why aren't you more active? Or why aren't you leading this resistance? Why aren't you persisting? It's been a couple of months. Do you know how grueling that campaign was? I ran for a little house race and I needed a lot of time off, right? Like it is grueling. A loss that shouldn't have necessarily been a loss other than, quite frankly, bullshit. It takes some time. So I just say give our leaders like Kamala some time, some space. understand it's grueling to run. It takes a lot out of you, but ultimately it will be the most rewarding thing you do. When I look back on that experience, despite the battle wounds that I had, despite some of the lashes I took, I elevated issues that mattered to me. I caused a candidate that was to the right of center who was running in a progressive district to address issues she never would have addressed that were on the record, right? And then I think about going to polling stations, going to all of the events you have to go to. More women that look like me would come up to me and say, "Oh, I think I want to run now. Oh my gosh, I didn't know." So even though you don't know all those eyes that are on you, there are people being inspired by your fight. So I say it to say, give your candidates grace. It is hard. It will be the most challenging thing, or one of the most challenging things you do, but also one of the most transformative. Um, After running, you feel like there's nothing I can't do. There's no conversation I can't have. So run for something. Like you have nothing to lose, and even if you lose the election, you're going to win something. You're going to elevate the issues that matter to you. So who knows if I do it again? I just don't regret that I did it. And things work out how they're supposed to work out. That district, as we knew, would only be a temporary district because North Carolina loves to redistrict. So that district is now gone. I think my only regret is that it was a predominantly diverse district and it was a very progressive district. It didn't have that representation. And so I think about some of the issues we could have driven home, some of the resources we could have driven home. So that's my only kind of regret on it is I just wish I would have fought harder or could have won that race to drive those resources for a district that shared my background. So,
I
you
love
know,
that. But to come from never doing this before to getting second place is huge. And
yeah,
I can only imagine how exhausting it is. And
horribly.
yeah,
Yeah.
let's give Kamala Harris some grace
I
because
couldn't imagine.
she not only ran in this
Hmm.
election, she was our vice president for 4
For
years.
4 years.
She ran in the election before that. Let the woman go be on an island and enjoy some time with her
Joyce,
husband.
just to before she gets back in the fight, give her a minute. But it goes back to what we were talking about before we recorded. I think there's misplaced anger towards her, misplaced expectations. What you want to see is year round campaigning from Democrats, year round investment in communities. You want to see just a year round leadership. The fact that we shut down, after 2024, we shut down until February because we were waiting for a DNC chair. And then the DNC chair had to take some time to figure out the staff. And it's like we are in the midst of an existential threat. We are seeing the collapsing of democracy. I don't have time for you to figure out like like a reset. So I think that misplaced, there's some of that there, but just have grace for people that run. And it's a hard job, but she'll get back in the fight, however that might be, whatever that looks like.
It's interesting as we're talking and stuff and talking about women running and more groups coming up
Hmm.
and seeing our representatives actually do more, show up more, use social media more. It's so interesting to me also to see how many are now calling their representatives. How many are
Hmm.
speaking out? How many are attending town halls? And like to your point of we need to do this year round, imagine if everyone was this engaged all the time.
Yeah.
We would be informed. We would understand,
Yeah.
what is going on.
Yeah.
I think that this might be the only positive lining that we're seeing come out of all of this is that so many understand. Yeah, you can pick up the phone. Yes, it's going to be nerve wracking at first. And
Hmm.
one of my neighbors, she goes, "I called 3 times before I left a voicemail."
But it's funny because we persisted an advocacy day where we took some of our influencers to meet with the messaging arms of the Capitol. And one of our influencers who reaches over 1 million women across TikTok and then another million across our other platforms just said, we're asking people to call, but does it really work? And I think people need that education moment. We're like, oh, let's really educate people. It absolutely works. When you're calling into those offices and having been a chief of staff through the ACA debates, through Trump's first term, When you call those offices, if you blow up those phone lines, you really shut down that office. That office is going to have a hard time to operate. They have to pay attention. They have to pay attention from every level of that office, from the staff assistant that's answering those phones to the chief of staff to the member. They pay attention to the outrage. They pay attention to your voice. The other thing that happens when and every office runs different, so it does depend on the way that your representative operates. But traditionally, when there's a tough vote coming, a member of Congress and the chief of staff will say to their team, give me the call logs. I want to see the call logs because I want to know how many yeses and how many no's that we had, because ultimately that member of Congress's number one job is to get reelected. So if there's an overwhelming majority that says vote this way, they're going to vote that way. So it sounds like, if someone calls my cell phone, I just send them to voicemail. It doesn't work that way. In the halls of the Capitol, you will, one, shut that office down. They will have to pay you attention. And then two, they'll see your collective outrage and it will sway them to do one thing. Because again, a member of Congress's number one job is to get reelected. And so I just say to anyone listening, never forget that, the power of the people. And if you go back to the ACA debate, where we were like, Democrats do not control a lever, we're going to lose the Affordable Care Act. The way that people stormed the Capitol, Michelle, I have never cried in my office in front of constituents, let alone my staff. Seeing moms in particular and dads bring their disabled children, their children who are battling chronic illnesses, putting them in front of Congress. You couldn't walk through the halls of the Capitol. We couldn't open our office doors because there was some person grappling with our healthcare system that was coming to tell their story. And it just was the most just emotional thing to see someone be that vulnerable with their illness, but they had no choice. They didn't want to put their child up there. They didn't want to bring their child to DC that's grappling with a health issue. But if they didn't have health care, the alternative, unfortunately, would have been worse. And we held the line. We still have the ACA, right? That can happen now. Do not lose sight of that. Like, we did it then, we're going to do it now. And it's not going to be some national unicorn Democratic leader that's going to fire us up. It's going to be you, Michelle, your followers, Michelle, me. It's going to be women in Persist, our persisters. We are going to hold the line for our values and our progress. So just don't lose sight of what we've been able to do through people. Keep doing it because it makes a difference.
I love that. I love it.
Yeah.
We're going to make
Yeah,
the
remember,
difference.
we are going to do it. We don't have a choice. I don't know about you.
No, no.
We don't have a choice. So yeah, but we've been in tough binds, and I just think we've got to kind of unite, bridge some of these divides that people are trying to sow within the Democratic coalition, and just keep our eyes on the prize, which is protecting our progress and our democracy.
And now with Persist, I know we're all coming together. You've
Mm-hmm.
got these big city events coming up. And what do you envision in the future for it? Because I can
Yeah.
imagine that a lot of persisters are going to want to gather to do smaller, wherever they are in the middle of anywhere in the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah.
What do you envision for what Persist is going to do and become?
Yeah, so we right now convene in larger cities because it's easier for people in surrounding areas to get to. But obviously, we want to have chapters across the spectrum. Off Persist, we do a lot of our organizing on Signal. So we have like this massive Signal chat, which is just, it can be unruly. It can get active. But people have broken off and built a DC one, a Maryland one. And you're seeing people take this organizing spirit in their local communities. So we want to be able to make investments where we can build an online community that organizes people and allows you to get offline and in communities. So we're looking at modern tools. One, we're looking at moving into a branded app. So that way you can actually build a community. You can get a little ping on your branded app, join this call. Your sisters in Indiana are doing something. That's what we're trying to make a strategic investment in, because I also think that there's more modern ways to organize people, both, online and in person. We just have to invest in those tools. And then the other thing is building relationships. I have already seen it. Like we put together a group of women, had no idea what would come of it. They are now running a special election effort down in Florida. They have raised money to pay influencers. They are doing phone banks. They did a fundraiser with Doug Jones for the special election candidates in Florida. They're going to pop and pivot into New York. All of that happened just because we had a connection event. And they went off and sparked magic. So one, it's continuing to build those little networks, doing it in a modern way, and then hoping that we empower the magic that comes from that. And that's the essence of a grassroots coalition.
I love it. Count me
It's
in. Well, I'm
yeah,
already in, but count me in
yeah,
further.
yes. And then come to find out, I found out yesterday, who knew, they built a Persist book club because a lot of the women in Persist are actually authors. And so they're reading each other's books that they didn't even know that X and X has a book, X and X has a book. But that's part of the magic. I didn't even know, but they have a whole Persist chapter that is book clubs. And when you think about political organizing, the way that you bring people who might be a little bit more moderate or might be a little bit different on politics than you into the flock is you talk about some things that maybe it's not always politics, right? So books, women love a book club. People love a book
Mhm.
club. I love a book club. I got my book right here. I'm trying to read it. I don't know if you can see it, but gosh, what if we just had a women's empowerment book club? Then we've got the Persist music. Like, so we have a playlist. You bring people into the fold. That's how you expand your coalition, by having common interests. One of the reasons we wanted to convene at Diane von Furstenberg's place is because people love fashion. It doesn't matter your political leaning as a woman. You love fashion. You want to be in the room in fashion. But we can start having a political discourse with you and start building like-minded consensus. And so I'm excited to see where this goes. And I just love every day to see some kind of offshoot of it, of a coalition of women that went off and did something. So we'll see where it goes. But being flexible, giving people the ability to take Persist and use it how they need to use it, I think is what differentiates us from a lot of different organizations. We're not telling you have to do it this way. You have to message this way if you're an influencer. Some of our influencers have 3-4 million followers. Why would we dare tell you how you have to communicate? But we just connect you to national organizational presidents who might give you the background on policy, right? Because we have a lot of our national org partners, like for the president of National Women's Law Center, Moms Rising, Paid Leave for All. They're in Persist. They have an expertise that can get content creators what they need, organizers what they need. So say it all to say, think of us as just a network of like-minded and politically inclined women who are going to do some magic, to be honest with you, Michelle.
I love it. Oh, I love it. I love it. I
Yeah.
love it. Where can everyone find more information on Persist and you?
Yes. Yes. So go to right now. You won't believe it. We are only a month and a half old. And in that month and a half, we have grown our ranks to be over 20,000. And across persisters is what we call you, persisters. Our individual platforms reach over 60 million folks. We have amassed this in a month and a half. So right now, we have social media channels is the best way to get engaged. So go to Instagram or Blue Sky. We're at the Persist Network, and we also just launched LinkedIn. And subsequently, we will be doing a website. But again, we're grassroots. We are a small coalition that has been here for 6 weeks now. So bear with us, but definitely go to Instagram, Blue Sky, or LinkedIn, and you will find ways to plug in, get engaged. And we just look forward to continuing to grow and hopefully one day have chapters across the country where women are just connected.
I love it. Thank you so much, Rhonda. Thank you for being you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing
No, thank
yourself and for
you.
creating this.
Yes, I was telling for folks listening, Michelle is stuck with me for life, unfortunately. We will be hitting the road. We will be doing
Yes.
all kinds of good trouble. So definitely stay tuned. And thank you for having me and for doing this work.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Bye, everyone.
Okay, who's running for office next? Let me know. I'm in your corner. And who is joining the Persist Network? Come and join me, be a persister, and let's go fight this battle. We can do it together, but we need to be active. We can't be silent. You have to stand up. Go find Rhonda, find me, join us, and I can't wait for us to do this together.